Sweet.
You're live.
All right, good deal. Welcome and good evening. We've got lots of kids in the background.
Sorry, I'm getting over so I can mute myself.
Okay.
Forgiveness. Muting now.
All right, good deal. So glad you guys have joined us for the first book backpack session. We're really excited about these, not only for getting ready for conference, but for any of these. Tonight we're covering the all-important first page of your manuscript, and I'm excited to introduce Lisa Mangum. She's the managing editor of Shadow Mountain Publishing. She's also the Realm Makers Conference presenter of the elective. I love this. Everybody dies, so you've got to argue like her, right? Killing your heroes, your villains, and your darlings. Lisa's also the author of 4 national best-selling YA novels, short stories, and novellas. She's also written a book on writing based on the show Supernatural. So without further ado, if everyone could just be mindful of mute, and of course use the chat feature to if questions come up, and then of course toward the end we may do raise hand feature or something. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. So without further ado, here is Lisa.
Thank you. It's great to see everybody. And can everybody hear me? I hope so. Drop in the chat if you can't. Although I suppose if you can't hear me, then that instruction doesn't help. At any rate, I'm really glad to be able to visit with you guys this afternoon about first pages and first chapters for submissions. That's a super important part of the submission process and the querying process. Thank you for the introduction. I have been with Shadow Mountain Publishing as managing editor since 2014, but I've been in publishing as an editor since 1997. So I think if my math is right, I'm coming up on 25 years. And for most of those years, I've also been in charge of the slush pile, having manuscripts come in either by request or from agents or from authors who want Shadow Mountain to look at their work and decide if it's something that we want to publish. So I have seen a lot of query letters, and I've seen a lot of first pages, and I have seen some things that work and some things that maybe don't work. And so I thought we could talk about that. I'm also very open for questions. If you have questions at any point, just put them in the chat. I should be able to keep up on that, and then we can answer them as we go. So if you have burning questions or need me to clarify something, that'd be a great place to put it. For me, first pages, there's a lot of work that has to be done with a first page. Like you have to introduce your main character, a character, and you've got to establish your voice, and there's got to be some description and world building and some dialogue, and you've got to establish a goal. And it feels like there's a lot of things that you have to do for a successful first page. And sometimes that can feel really overwhelming. But for me, I sort of look at it that there's really only 2 things that I look for for a first page that captures my attention. And the first one is something heroic that your character can demonstrate in a small kind of way. So for example, if your main character, if one of their heroic qualities is that they are courageous in the face of danger, then try to find something that you can, a small way that courage in the face of danger could be demonstrated or talked about or shown on the first page or the first 2 pages, so that at the end of the book, when your character then has grown into that heroic quality and does show great courage in the face of great danger, I can look back at those first couple of pages and say, oh, see, it was right there. I knew it. I knew that this character had it in him all along, because right from the very beginning, there was something about him that made me believe that he could be courageous in the face of danger. It can be something small, it can be something kind of quiet, but something that can link to the end, so that I can sort of take note of that and say, oh, this is an interesting kind of thing to that I can pay attention to as the reader and as the editor. The second thing that I'm really looking for is pretty simple when it comes right down to it. I'm really just looking for an invitation to keep reading. And that can look like any number of things. It can look like a heroic quality that I can get a sense that this is going to be something that you as the author, you're going to build on, you're going to develop, and this is going to show me a little something about a character. It could be something as a really good first line. It could just be a turn of phrase somewhere in the middle of it. It could be a really luscious description of whatever it is that your strength is as a writer. If you're really, really good at description, showcase that on the first page and let me know that is the invitation to keep reading. You like this? This is what I do really well. You're going to get more of this throughout the rest of the book. And so as an editor looking at pages, I try to keep a really open mind when I approach a book, because I want to find a reason to keep reading. I'm looking for something that is enough to just pull me to that second page, pull me through that first chapter. Now, having said that, other editors, other agents, other people might have very different processes, and they might actually be looking for reasons to say no. I have one friend, one agent that I know, who pretty much 3 strikes and you're out, and he's looking, and if you've got a typo, and if you've got a clunky kind of sentence, and if you've got something that it feels like same old, he's out and he's done, and that's it. So you kind of have to take what I'm saying a little bit like, this is how Lisa does it. Not everybody will do it like this, but I do think for a vast majority of editors and agents, when we come to a first page, we really are, what it boils down to is we're looking for a reason to fall in love with your book. We're looking for a reason to keep reading. And so if you can do that, I think you're halfway there in getting a first page in a shape where you'll catch somebody's attention. Because truthfully, when it comes, I got into this business because I love to read. Shocking, I know. I love books, I love words, I love story. And so I want to find a book that I, as a reader, will fall in love with and will want to tell my friends and tell everybody that I work with, like, this is the book, this is the story, this is the thing I want. And so I always come to a project with that first, and then I sort of put my more critical editorial eyes on it, saying, well, the author she doesn't know how to use commas very well, and so there's a lot of punctuation problems, but we can fix that later. I don't know that I've ever rejected a manuscript out of hand for a smattering of typographical errors. Now, if it's dominant, yes, that's a problem. But if you've got a couple things that are just a little ragged around the edges, that's not going to be the kind of thing where I'll say, love the story, hate the commas, it's a no. I'll say, I love the story, we can fix the commas, let's keep looking at it. Because I want you to do what you do best, which is tell me the story, be the writer, have your creative self on the page, take me to someplace new, introduce me to new characters and to new ideas, and then I can fix the nuts and bolts of it a little bit later after we get that in. But I want to know that you as a creative person can hook me in a first couple pages in that first chapter. So that's sort of my general view and philosophy about first pages. I know they can be very daunting because it feels like it has to be perfect before you'll get an agent or an editor to even look at it. But I don't want you to be afraid of that first page. I want you to look at it as a place for you really to shine and to identify what is it that I do best, and that's what I'm going to put on the first page. Does that kind of make sense? I see somebody, Stephanie had said that was kind of an encouraging viewpoint. So I hope that you feel some encouragement that that first page is not a barrier, but an invitation to invite me into your world, invite me into your story, so that I can get to know you and I can get to know your characters, and then I can find a story that I'm going to fall in love with, and move forward. Questions Does anybody have any questions right off the bat? No questions? I answered everything. Yes. I will say one of the other things, Pam says, do you want a one sheet? For pitches, that could sometimes be helpful, a query letter or one sheet that kind of summarizes your story and gives me a little bit of information about you and tells me some of the nuts and bolts that, what genre, what your word count is, what the title is, what your comps are. All of that information is really, really important and helpful as well. And in many ways, that can actually sometimes stands in for your first page. Because when I come to a manuscript, I don't start with just page one. I start with the query letter. I start with your name. I start with your bio. And so that kind of gets me into the right mindset for even experiencing your story when I turn to chapter one, page one, and start reading. And so that information can be really valuable to hook my interest, to invite me in, and to give me a framework to think about what your story is going to be about and what my expectations are. So those, I think, can be very helpful. And we can talk a little bit later on query letters, sort of the three main elements that comprise a good solid query letter. Are epilogues a no-go for pitches? That is from Jeff. I'm wondering if you mean prologues, because an epilogue, it comes at the very, very end of the book. So in case you really do mean an epilogue, the answer is yes, to a certain extent, because I do want to know how the story ends in the pitch. I want you to tell me all of the secrets. I want you to tell me all of the twists. I want you to tell me all of the things, so that I have a sense for where the story is going to go and if it's going to feel like a journey worth taking. Oh, so he says yes, prologue. Okay, yes, prologues are a really important, hotly debated topic. You'll find some editors that are like, no prologues, none of the time, they're useless. But as a writer, having written prologues, I do not feel that they are entirely useless. I feel like they do, if they do their job correctly, they can be a very, very valuable part of your book. Not every book requires a prologue. I think that's the first thing to say. And I tend to see prologues come up mostly in, I see them quite a lot in fantasy and science fiction. And I see them for young adults and adults. I don't usually see a lot of prologues in middle grade fiction or in contemporary fiction. And I have no hard data to back that up. That's just sort of my general sense and the things that I've seen. And I think it's because middle grade kids, 10, 11, 12-year-olds they'll skip over the prologue thinking it's not important. And then they'll just like flip through and start with chapter one. And so in that case, a prologue is not a good idea to have for that age group or for those readers, because they're going to miss information that you have put into the prologue. That's like they'll have started on chapter two. So for me, a big question that I always ask to decide if in fact I need a prologue is, could this actually just be chapter one? It's going to be the very first thing I read, it's going to be the first thing anybody encounters. And is this in fact the strongest way to start the story? Is it in fact, should I just call it chapter one? And if the answer is no, I shouldn't call it chapter one, because there's a huge time gap between this section of the book and the next section of the book, or we're going to switch point of views, or there's going to be a big tonal shift. Then I'd say, okay, well then it does in fact need to be a prologue. And does this genre, does this audience respond well to a prologue? And if the answer is yes, then leave it in and let it do its job. And that'll still be the first thing that I read. And I'll still be looking for those same kinds of things. Does it have some heroic quality? Is there a cool turn of phrase or good description or great dialogue or something that invites me to keep reading, I'm still going to look for that. I also think prologue should probably be fairly short, probably shorter than a traditional chapter. If your traditional chapters are 10 to 12 pages, I don't know that I'd have a prologue that was also 10 to 12 pages. It feels like, then again, shouldn't it just be chapter 1? So that's kind of my viewpoint on prologues. Again, you might get different opinions from different people, but if it's doing its job, then it can stay in the book. That's kind of how I feel as an editor on anything. If the words you're choosing, the punctuation you're choosing, if it's doing its job, it can stay in the book. And if it isn't, then we can cut it out and it doesn't hurt anything, because I only want stuff in the book that's going to do the job of telling the story and communicating to the reader and giving them that experience of traveling to this new place or meeting these new people and having that cathartic experience of art. I see Christy had a question, what's a comp? And that stands for a comparison title. So you'll often see it for fans of Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn series. You might also like my book that is similar in these ways. Or, my book is a cross between Top Gun and Breaking Bad, where there are two items that when put together are kind of interesting or can get me into the right mood. Comps can be really subjective, but a good rule of thumb is to try to pick properties that are within the last 3 to 5 years, probably closer, maybe even the last 2 to 3 years in your age group and your genre. That tells me that you know the market. That tells me that you've done your research, kind of what's trending, what's popular, and where your book would sit in the bookstore and what books would sort of be on the same shelf with yours. And so that way, if you could pick 1 or 2 comps, then I can keep track of that and say, oh, once again, this is something for me to keep to put me in the right mindset for what this book is going to be about and set some expectations. I'd encourage you not to comp some of like the once in a lifetime phenomenal books, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, those kinds of things where it's like, it's the next Harry Potter. It probably actually isn't. I'm sorry. And it's like Lord of the Rings. Well, lots of things are like Lord of the Rings. Could you pick something that maybe is a little bit less iconic and perhaps a little bit more true to your particular story? And comps they don't have to be plot driven. They can be character driven. They can be tonally driven. So you could say, for readers who like strong friendship driven stories like X will like mine, because at the heart, it's a strong friendship story. So you can pull a theme or a character or a style out of a comp and use that to say, this is like what my book is attempting to do the same kind of thing. So, and if I don't know the comp that you put in your cover letter, that I will probably go look it up, especially if it sounds intriguing, to be a little bit more familiar with it. So don't panic if you feel like you have to pick something that I personally am familiar with, because you don't know what I've read. And so pick what's true to your book. Does that make sense? Okay. What kind of cliche openings have you come across? This is from Lindsay. Oh, there's a lot. I get a lot of waking up from a dream, which please don't do that. And it's so cliche. I see it a lot, and very, very rarely does it pull me in. So opening with a dream, or opening with today started like any other day. It was totally normal. And I'm like, I don't want that either. Just take me to the part where it's not normal and just introduce me to the thing that's going to change the day. And that's where it's going to be exciting. Oddly enough, I see, especially in fantasy, I see a lot of openings of the young princess training with training for swordplay with the Royal Guard. I don't know why, but I see that a lot. I see a lot of stories that open with the heroine running through the forest at night. Those are not necessarily bad openings, but for whatever reason, I tend to see them a lot, to the point where I'm like, okay, let's get to the part where she's done running through the forest. And then maybe that's where the story actually starts. So those are some of the top ones that come to mind that kind of give me pause, or kind of put me off when I'm reading the story. I'm looking for some good action. I'm looking for a first page that starts with a problem that needs to be solved, or a question that needs to be answered. I'm looking, those tend to invite me in a little bit more. Stephanie says, you say play to your strengths. For you personally, what tends to draw you into story, especially for sci-fi and fantasy? So I've mentioned a couple things, that a question that needs to be answered, or a problem that needs to be solved, even if it's kind of a small one. I personally like a really strong and vibrant character voice, because this is the person that's going to lead me through the story. This is the person I'm going to be inhabiting when I go on this adventure. And I want that person to feel like a real person. I want a sense of their personality. I want a sense of their bias. I want them, to feel like they're in control of telling me this story, whether it's in first person or third person. I tend to gravitate to those stories where I'm immediately drawn in by the character, by what they say, and by what they do. And especially for sci-fi and fantasy, that doesn't have to have magic on the first page. It doesn't have to have a dragon on the first page. I want a sense of beautiful writing and a character that I feel like I can trust to carry me through that story. And that's hard to then say, and here's how you do that. These are the words that you use to make that a reality, because again, that's going to feel a little subjective of, did you hit that target, or did you come close, and is that close enough? And I sort of don't know until I read it, kind of thing. But if you can keep that goal in the back of your mind and ask yourself, does my character come across in these first few pages as somebody worth rooting for? What do I learn about this character in the first couple pages? And is that enough? Those could be some great questions to think about as you do revisions, as you have your beta readers go through it. Give them your first 2 pages, and then say, write down everything that you know about the main character just based on these 2 pages. Both anything from a name or physical description to what their views are about people and the environment and the politics, because all of that can in fact be filtered and come through in just a few pages. What's your biggest turnoff when reading a first page? That's Katie's question. Really, it is a feeling that the story isn't going anywhere. That I've read the whole first page or the first couple pages, and it's all been internal thought. It's all been just setting the table, but nobody's brought me the entree. And whatever small little breadcrumbs have been offered are not quite enough. So if it's feeling like the story is dragging a little bit, and I don't know where we're going to go with this. I don't know what's driving the character in the first couple pages to address whatever the instant problem is. That can kind of be a turnoff. I'm trying to think, and then of course, like I mentioned before, if there are a lot of copy editing kinds of problems, missing words, misspelled words, incorrect punctuation, basic formatting, those kinds of things, if it is a dominant kind of problem, that's a turnoff, because I'll look at that and say, well, yes, I can fix all of these things, but it's going to take a lot of work, and it's going to inhibit me from sinking into the story the way I would like to, because I've got to stay at the surface and parse my way through comma splices and incorrect quotation marks and misuse of homonyms. Those kinds of things can be a big turnoff when I'm looking at a page. Chris says, if you have multiple POV characters in a novel, are there any rules about which one to start with? Great question. I don't think that I don't know, as with most writing, I don't know that there's a hard and fast rule on that. If it was me and I had a book with multiple point of view characters, I would probably start with the character who is going to grow the most over the course of the story. That could be one way of deciding who to start with. The other option would be in the specific scene that you are telling, that where you're opening your book in a particular location or to solve a particular problem, you put the character in who has the most to lose in that situation. So because what that does is it raises the stakes right away in the story. If the problem is that there's a bomb in the post office, and you put somebody in there who, well, this example that is going in my head, it's not working. At any rate, if you have whatever the problem is in your story that you're starting with, and you put the character in that has the most to lose if that problem doesn't get solved, that could also be another interesting place to start with an interesting character, because I'll feel the tension of, oh no, this is going to be a big problem if things go poorly for that. Does that help, Chris? I don't know where you are on the screen, so I'm gonna hope that answered your question. Let's see. Lindsay also had another question. She says, how quick or slow do you or other agents prefer the inciting incident to occur? Is the first few pages or chapters acceptable? For the inciting incident, I think I don't know that it has to happen on the first page, but I think it has to happen in the first few pages. And for sure, it's got to happen in the first chapter. If I don't get to truly the inciting incident till chapter 2, most likely I've waded through a lot of things that I'm starting to feel like, what's the point of the story? So I would not wait. You'd want to introduce it as soon as you can in those first couple of pages to really hook me. It's always a fine line, because if you start right with the explosion of, this is the inciting incident happens in the first sentence, I might not be emotionally connected to the character enough to care whether or not the car crash happens. So look at your inciting incident, maybe back out your timeline like 5 minutes, 10 minutes before that inciting incident, and see if somewhere right in there is where a good place would be for you to start the story. You'd have a little bit of time to introduce me to the world, to the problems, to the characters, to your style, to some description, and then the inciting incident happens and we're off to the races. Does that help? Okay. I hope this is helpful. I love talking about books. I love, in fact, it's kind of a good time for me to talk about first pages, because I'm working on putting together an anthology right now. And so I have like 80 stories that I need to read to decide which short stories are going in the anthology. So I'm reading a lot of first pages, and I'm being really conscious about which ones immediately catch me and which ones I'm like, I don't know about this, and how quickly they lose me. So it's been on my mind to be able to talk about it. Let's see, coming back to a question similar from earlier, is it all right if the inciting incident happens in chapter 1 and not the prologue? Yes, I think that I could see a path where that could work, especially if the prologue is shorter, 3 or 4 pages, maybe 5 pages. And if you use that time for the prologue to really set the stage, or if there's like a time jump or a character jump, then you could use that for the prologue, and then the inciting incident could happen right away in chapter 1. I've seen that done quite effectively, and so it's kind of, again, that sort of balancing act of making sure having a prologue in your book is the right solution, the right idea to begin with. But yes, I think that would work. And then it says, this is from Cheryl. What if there's an inciting incident for the first arc, but then after that arc, there's a bigger inciting incident for the main plot? That's okay too, because the inciting incident, that first sort of problem, can be kind of a small problem. The example I always use, I go back to, is a book called Servant of the Dark God by Dave Brown. Yes. It's a number of years old, but the opening sentence is Tristan couldn't find his pants. That was the opening line. And that was the problem. And he couldn't find his pants. And so he goes into the kitchen and he finds them. And when he finds them, he looks up out the window and there's a mob coming to his house with pitchforks and torches. And now he has a bigger problem. Like, he solved the problem of where his pants were, but now he has a bigger problem because now people are coming to burn his house down and he doesn't know why. And so that's a little bit what I mean when I say I'm looking for a problem to be solved right away. So it doesn't necessarily you don't have to hit me right on the first page or the first couple of pages with like, here is the inciting incident for the major plot, because your character is going to go through a lot of problems that need to be solved along the way. And as long as I can see something in action, the inciting incident could come just a little bit later for the main plot. It's the same way, here's Lord of the Rings as the example. There's a lot of struggle that the hobbits go through, and because they think if we can just get to the prancing pony, right? They've left the Shire and they're on their way, and if we can just get to the prancing pony, we'll be fine. And then they get to the prancing pony and realize, oh crap, this is actually not the end of the story. This is actually just the beginning of a bigger story. But we don't mind, because at that point we've already seen them come up against challenges, figure out what to do, have that little mini arc to get them to the prancing pony. And now we include a larger group of people. We expand the world, we expand the viewpoint, we up the stakes, and then we continue to build from that. So hopefully that helps. Let's see. Danica says, I've been told a lot to show the main character's normal life before I get into the inciting incident. Do you have any suggestions on how to do this while still keeping interest and having the inciting incident in the first few pages? I've heard that advice too, about show the normal before you break the normal. And I think it kind of depends a little bit on the story you're telling and a little bit about how you want to tell it, because I've seen it both ways. And I've seen it done effectively both ways. So it's good advice and it's something to consider. But if that doesn't work for your particular story, then I don't know that you have to start with the normal life before we get to the inciting incident. I think that's where authors fall into the trap of opening the story with, it was a day like any other day. And I'm like, I don't want to wade through a lot of normal until I get to the interesting part. Perhaps maybe this will help if I phrase it this way. Show me how they would normally solve a problem, and then the inciting incident can happen, which is a bigger problem or an unexpected problem, or the problem that's going to change everything. And now they have to adapt and change how they would normally solve the problem because the normal doesn't work anymore. And I wish I had like a perfect example to illustrate a book that does that really well, but I'm kind of just thinking a little extemporaneously on that kind of example. The other option might be, instead of like showing me how they would solve a problem normally, show me a skill or a talent that they have that they're really good at, that they do in their normal life. And I bring that up because here I do have an example for this one, which is, I just saw Top Gun Maverick. And if you haven't seen it, it's so good. Highly recommended. But one of the things very early on in the movie, if you haven't seen the first one and you're just coming into this one, they have a great scene where Tom Cruise, as the instructor, the Maverick, takes up all of his students one-on-one dogfights, and every single one, he's getting the kill shot. He's taking him down a peg. Like, we see him in his element, and we see him at the top of his game, and we see him in his normal life flying the fighter jets and being the top of his game. And then later, as the movie moves on and other problems come up, and he has to rely on different talents and he has to rely on different skills in order to accomplish it. That contrast is really interesting. But right at the beginning, we come in at a level where we're like, I see in his normal life, he is top dog of the fighter jet pilots. And then that provides us some up and down with his character. Okay. So that was an example that was on my mind because we just saw I just saw the movie. Laura says, I'm starting to feel sorry for our characters. Yes, you should. You need to put them in situations where they struggle and suffer, because then the victory will be all the sweeter when they overcome, and when they triumph, and when they fail but rise again. And so I like stories where that's the character arc. Let's see. Pam also says the normal world can be just one sentence, and that is true. You can sum up, or you can just establish a baseline very easily, very simply at the very beginning before things start to change. Can the skill be something like kindness rather than a physical skill? Yes, Jeff, great observation. Especially if your character or your story is going to be like a character driven or a coming of age story, or there's going to be a lot of internal growth rather than an external adventure kind of story, then yes, that kind of skill, that kind of heroic quality can be kindness, it can be compassion, it can be intelligence. Those are all valuable traits and qualities that we would like our readers to emulate, or that to have characters embody those traits. And so, yes, if you can find a way in those first few pages to have your main character demonstrate an act of kindness in a heroic kind of way, that will endear us to that character early on. And that'll be the kind of thing where I, as the editor, will read, and as the reader will say, well, this is somebody I want to hang out with. This is somebody that I want to go on this adventure with. This is somebody who is interesting because they have this ability to be kind or compassionate or intelligent, a quieter kind of heroic quality than perhaps courage or brute strength. Okay, Rachel says, any advice for introducing a larger group of characters at the beginning of the story? I'm considering if I should delay introducing my main character's large family in the first chapter, even though it's a big part of who she is in her normal life. Great question. And my answer is actually watch the first episode of Firefly, the TV show Firefly, from many, many years ago. They do such a good job of introducing all of the various characters that are going to be part of the Firefly crew, And they do it with enough time that you feel like I have a sense of who Captain Mal is at the beginning. And then I get a sense of who Wash is. And then I get a sense of who River is. Not River. River is from Doctor Who. No, it is River. At any rate, and Shepherd Book. And because they bring them in sort of one by one as they add to the story. They all have their time and place for an entrance. But by the end of that episode, I know who everybody is, and I know what their relationships are, and I know where some of the tension points might be, or where some of the conflicts might be. But they don't just line me up in one paragraph and say, here are the 6 people that are going to be on the ship. Let's take one paragraph and talk about each of them. So introducing a large group of characters at the beginning of the story, I think still sort of needs to be done individually and with a hierarchy of who's the most important person I need to care about first. And then how do I slot all of the other people in later? Another good example is, I don't know if you guys have been watching Bridgerton, season 1 or season 2 on Netflix, but the Bridgerton family, I think there's like 8 kids, and there's a lot of, for the Regency Society, there's a lot of people and neighbors, and we don't actually hear a lot about the younger kids in the family. We only really hear about like 3 or 4 of the oldest kids, because the younger ones at this point aren't affecting the story. We just sort of need to know that they're there and that they're part of the family, and that's great, but the story is really going to be around these people. So they get a brief introduction and then their background. And so if you have a large group of characters, some of whom will be background or some of whom won't come into the story until later, you can delay introducing them and keep your focus on the characters that matter the most in the first few pages. Because what you don't want to do is overload me with 9 different names of characters that I have to keep track of, plus the world building, plus the location where they live, plus some fantasy or magical terminology. And then my first 2 pages are just filled with it's overload, and then I don't care about anything. And Cheryl says, as a reader, I get confused if you introduce too many people at once. So again, evaluate their introduction based on how important they are to the story and what their relationship is to the main character. And if that relationship is going to be a point of conflict or a point of support. And then I can start to say, oh, these people are on this side of the equation and these people are on this side of the equation. Katie says, will a POV change from chapter 1 to chapter 2 draw the reader out of the story, since they just spent the first few pages getting to know one character, then getting thrust into knowing another? No, I don't think, I think readers encounter enough books where that happens that's not a thing that they trip over. Romance novels do this all the time. Chapter 1, here's the girl. Chapter 2, here's the boy. Chapter 3, here's the girl again. And especially if chapter 2 is going to put us in a different POV, then I think most readers, and I as well, would just say, oh, here's my next most important character that I need to pay attention to. If you give me the first 5 chapters from one point of view and then suddenly switch in chapter 6 to somebody else, I might think that's a mistake. I might be like, oh, but I thought this was a book first person or third person just from this one point of view, and now suddenly that could feel a little jarring. But flipping chapter to chapter, you have my permission to do that. Is it an issue if the POV, this is from Aubrey, if the POV character in the prologue is not the same as in chapter 1? No, I don't. And again, I don't think so, because it's the other reason why prologues can sometimes work really, really well as a prologue if your character in the prologue is not your main character. So that's why I did prologues in my book. So the Hourglass Door trilogy that I wrote, young adult romance, love story, time travel, and I knew it was going to be first person from the girl's point of view, from Abby's point of view. I was going to tell it from that. But I also knew I needed the scene where the hero, Dante, actually goes through the time machine to come forward in time, right? Because she wouldn't know anything about that. And I wanted to show that because we was going to have a huge time jump. So the prologue is actually first person from Dante's point of view, present tense, about that very important scene for the story. And then chapter 1, we start with Abby, first person past tense, and we tell the story. And then for book 2, I did the same thing where the prologue was from a different character's point of view in the past, present tense, Abby, first person past tense for the rest. And the same with the third book in the story, in the trilogy. So I was very deliberate in how I did that kind of style and that kind of structure to say, I need this as a prologue because I'm telling a different part of the story. And as such, readers are willing to say, oh, I recognize that this is something a little different. So I'll read it and I'll love it and I'll get excited about the story. And then I'll also be able to follow through into chapter 1 with a new person and a new POV. Jeff says, I have a POV switch around chapter 4, but he's a main character that has been there since chapter 1. Is that something that's okay? And I think yes, especially if this character that shows up in chapter 4 is a POV character, if we're going to come back to that character later on as well. What I don't like is when a book is 90% established POV character, and then there's like one chapter from somebody else. That feels weird. Like, that pulls me out of the story. But if you've got a character, he's been there since the beginning, and now we are gonna, in chapter 4, switch, and I get the sense that he's gonna be a reoccurring point of view character, I have seen that work effectively. Morgan says, what items would you want a writer to bring to a pitch? Would they need to have their first page printed? For me, what I want you to bring to a pitch more than anything, I want you to bring your enthusiasm for your book. I want you to bring why you love this story. Because if you can effectively communicate to me why you love this story and why you are excited about this story and why this particular story is unique and interesting, I am more likely to believe you and say, that does sound interesting. That does sound exciting. Oh my goodness, I'm feeling quite enthusiastic about this story as well. And then I will read your first page and be like, this is exciting. I am excited about this, because I want to meet you in a pitch, reader to reader, as two people who love books, as two people who love stories. Just tell me what your story is about. Now, that's what I want you to bring emotionally to the pitch. Don't bring your nerves, just bring your excitement and your enthusiasm. Nuts and bolts, I do want you to bring enough of a pitch where I know who your main character is. These are the 4 things that I listen for in a pitch, or that I look for in a query letter or a one sheet. I want to know who your main character is. I want to know what the main goal of the story is. Frodo has to take the ring to Mount Doom. I want to know what some of the obstacles are that are standing in the way. Those can be emotional, internal obstacles. Those could be external problems. And I want to know, most importantly, what's at stake. And that stakes is usually what people forget to tell me about or forget to highlight in a pitch or a query letter. And I find that that is usually the thing that tips me over from, well, this sounds like a nice story, to I gotta read this, is if I feel that the stakes are high enough, that the choice that your character has to make at the end of the book is going to be a hard choice with lasting repercussions, and that it's getting real, like those stakes are high. And it doesn't have to be somebody's death. You can have high stakes where nobody dies, but if I can feel that it's going to be a dramatic and climactic ending where what would I pick between these two things? I'm much more inclined to want to read the story, to see how you get me there, to see what the character does in that moment, and to feel the joy of victory or the satisfaction of the villain getting his just desserts, that kind of thing. So if you, for a pitch, don't bring your first page. I'm not going to read it. I don't have time. We only, a pitch is anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes. And I want to spend that time talking to you. I want to spend that time having you tell me the story so I can ask questions and we can have a conversation. And I'm not going to read a first page. So I wouldn't bring that. But if you want to bring your cover letter or a one sheet or your query letter with you as reference, I think that's perfectly fine. Because even though I say, don't be nervous, a lot of people still are nervous. and for many people, having sort of a cheat sheet to kind of keep them on track can be very helpful. Does our manuscript need to be complete when we meet with you? That would be ideal, but it would also not be necessary, as long as you're really pretty close. I'd much rather, the ideal is, yes, your manuscript is completely complete. Next best is you're 80% of the way there. Last on the list is you haven't written any of it at all. Because what you don't want to have happen is you don't want to get me excited about your story and have me say, oh my gosh, send it to me. I would love to read this, and then have to confess, well, it's not written and you'll have it in 2 years. Because future Lisa in 2 years might not remember how excited present Lisa is about this story right now. And so you don't want to gamble that I'll still be excited about it in 2 years. Now, I'll still be excited about it in 2 weeks or maybe 2 months, but much beyond that, I'm going to be swamped with so many other things to be excited about. I don't want you to get lost in the noise again. This is Aubrey, is it less professional if we have some notes to reference? No, that's totally fine. You can bring notes, you can bring whatever it is that's going to help you be your best self and to talk about your story with the kind of joy and enthusiasm that I know that you all have, because you've been sitting down every day and writing on whatever story it is that you've been working on. And hopefully that process of writing has brought you joy and has made you happy, and that being a writer and telling stories is something that you want to share. And that's what I want you to be able to shine in and tell me that, show me that part. That's as valuable as the words that you put on the page. Okay, this is probably our last question. Really quick, she says, Danica says, if I'm writing a trilogy and only have book 1 completed, is it best to wait to pitch until I have books 2 and 3 more fleshed out? No, if you're writing a trilogy, you can pitch book 1 and just tell me it's a trilogy and I'm working on 2 and 3. That's fine, because I'm going to make a decision on book 1. So you don't have to, I wouldn't wait and invest a lot of time in books 2 and 3 until you know you've got somebody on the hook for book 1. Okay. How did I do on time? I felt like I went really fast.
You did great. You did awesome. We are like right on time, and such dense information. It's just good information, and I can tell by the questions that everybody got a lot out of it. And I appreciate, I mean, there's some specific questions in there too, so it's best to just find out what whoever you're pitching for, what it is that they're looking for, and what they like for you to bring, and things like that. So do your research is definitely a good thing to keep in mind. So thank you for spending your evening. I don't know where everybody's from, but your evening, your morning, wherever you are in the world, your evening with us. And just a quick reminder, next Tuesday, we're going to be going over synopses with James L. Rupart and Tosca Lee. So don't miss that. That'll be exciting, and can't wait to see what this duo has for us. It's probably going to get a little off the rails. So everybody just kind of hold on and we'll split. And then a couple of questions that made me think we are going to do pitch practice this year. Thomas Umstadt Jr. does it. I think this is like his third year at least, that he does these where it literally he'll go one-on-one with you for as long as we can to really literally practice your pitch with them. And Lisa, you talked about the nerves and things like that. And so that helps. It helps flesh out. And I've seen pitches where they start talking about the book and they realize they've got some major holes in the story. And so I think this helps solidify a lot of overall story issues that we might have. So thank you so much. I appreciate your time. Thank you to everyone, and we will see you guys next Tuesday.
Thank you.
Bye.